First off, we have Mike Ritchie, who needs no introduction, who will be talking to us about how we will achieve 80% diversion with FOGO. Thanks, Mike. Back to you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thank you. Essentially, we're not going to make 80%, but I'm just going to tell you why. Is it aspirational or wishful thinking? It's wishful thinking. And I'm talking at the national level, but you can equally apply this at the New South Wales level or the Queensland level, or you can equally apply it at the Sydney or local government level. The national target agreed to in the National Waste Policy is 80% diversion from landfill by 2030, and that diversion includes energy from waste. Okay, that's a big target. On average, we're doing about 60% at the moment, so we've got to grow it by 20% in 8 years. Possible? Probably not. But a bit of history. In 1996, we were doing about 22 million tonnes of generation and landfilling about 21 million tonnes of it, recycling about 7%. Look at how the industry has transformed in 20 years. We're now generating 3 times as much, 61 million tonnes, recycling about 37 million tonnes of it, but landfilling almost identical amount to what we did 20 years ago. And there was a session here just 20 minutes ago talking about the crisis that Sydney has, that our landfills are filling up and we are not recycling fast enough to reduce the demand on landfill, and we have a major problem coming down on us, but that's an aside. So the national target set 80% by 2030. That means we need to grow our recycling rate by 18 million tonnes, or 2 million tonnes per year for the next 9 years, and that is double the rate of growth of recycling that we've achieved in the last 20 years. Let's let that sink in. We have to double the rate we have invested in recycling and do it in the next 8 years. That's what the economy needs to look like to achieve an 80% diversion target by 2030. Now, my frustration is this maths is done by me, a piddling little consultant. It's not done by government. There's not a government in Australia whose job it is to achieve the 80% target. There's not a single bureaucrat, officer, politician whose job description says thou shalt achieve the 80% target. Not in the New South Wales government, not in the Queensland government. There is no modelling sitting behind the 80% target to say, all right, how are we going to get there? What does the maths look like? I'm going to walk you through some of the maths and just show you that it's difficult to get there. All right. The point of that slide is waste is like a river. It flows downhill to the cheapest price, and wherever we have cheap landfills in the Australian economy, that's where it's going. You could say that's a good thing because it lowers economic costs for the economy, but if we're going to set an 80% target, we need to deal with cheap landfill pricing. They are like vacuum cleaners. They suck up resources indiscriminately, and no one can establish a profitable recycling business next door to an underpriced landfill. Most Australian recycling is uneconomic and is subsidised by someone, you and I in the case of yellow top bins, or industry or business. Really, only cardboard and metal have enough economic value to recycle themselves. Organics is the biggest stream, but we can't hit 80%. 20 years of sustained economic growth, all good, but you can see that the economy is directly linked to waste generation growth. And if we want to hit the targets, the top line is blue, generation rate, yellow is the recycling rate, red is the landfill rate, and the little piddling thing at the bottom is energy from waste. To achieve our targets nationally, we need to lift recycling up to there, and we need to lower garbage for the first time ever. And that growth is 18 million tonnes. Even if you take our current projected recycling rate of growth, that'll deliver us 9 million tonnes. So if industry just keeps doing and council just keep doing what they're doing, we'll grow up by about 9 million tonnes based on historic trends, but we need to double that. New South Wales, exactly the same maths, same kind of proportions, same kind of everything. All right, where are the states at the moment? That shows for each waste stream, for each state, the current activity or the current recycling rate, and the gap is up to that 80% line. It is a massive gap. It's 18 million tonnes. The drivers that we have in the market right now, in spite of all the good talk by the governments that have been here in the last week, are not enough to get to the 80% target. So the first question we have to ask ourselves, is it a voluntary target or are we actually trying to do it? Right? Because if we're trying to do it, We need to stop talking about the little successful organic project or the little successful sand shoe recycling project, and we need to start talking about the economic drivers that drive hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars of investment in the economy that grow tens of thousands of jobs, not one or two jobs. And I just don't hear it coming from government, federal or state, to say we have someone who's responsible for working out what the investment horizon is for industry to come and pump serious capital into this space. The organics mandate are great. They're not widespread. I'll talk to that in a minute. The export bans only affect 1.2 million tonnes, and they do nothing to affect diversion. They only achieve reprocessing domestically of stuff that's already been diverted. So don't look to the export bans as being a solution. New EPR schemes only really address about 1 million tonnes of the 37 million tonnes we already address, and they have about maximum 500,000 tonnes, which I'll talk to in a minute, of future growth. And energy from waste in its infancy, and the policy settings have got the wobbles, which I'll talk to. All right, so by way of case study, Ron Wainberg from the MRA team and many other consultants have done this kind of waterfall diagram to say, what do we have to do to get to the target established by that government? In this case, it was the ACT, and he looked across all the waste streams and he said, look, you know, there's this amount of waste there. If we do this, change that, we'll gain this amount of tonnes. So I've just taken that model and said, let's do exactly the same thing at a national level. And there it is. So, working our way across the screen, we do 37 million tonnes, and we need to get to 56 million tonnes and do it in 8 years. What policy settings are going to get us there based on the knowledge we have today? Again, I say this is the work government should be doing, not relying on MRA, and Arcadis have done some of this, but it's not published. Arcadis have done it for New South Wales. In the last session we were asking, where do we see this data? So if every household in Australia had a FOGO bin and we had commercial mandated FOGO, that would recover about 7 million tonnes of compost. It would reduce Australia's emissions by 7.2 million tonnes of greenhouse gas, CO2e, and it would generate about 4 million tonnes of compost. Brilliant. It's the single most important public policy initiative that government could do to get to the 80%. It drives more tonnes than any other single initiative, but it's a mandate, so it requires government to regulate. The problem with New South Wales is it doesn't kick in until 2030, so it's going to have no effect as a mandate in getting us to the 2030 target, right? Unless everybody does it, in that final year. And unfortunately, a number of councils in New South Wales are now seeing it as a bit of a, okay, we can take a pause, we can take a break, we don't need to get there till 2030. Curbside recycling, even if we double the size of curbside recycling, it's small. Curbside recycling, for those of you who don't know, is 1.9 million tonnes of Australia's 37 million tonnes that we recycle today. It's about 4 or 5%. It's tiny. So even if we do curbside recycling a whole lot better, it's small tonnes. So let's not fixate there. It's not going to get us, even if we doubled it, it's only another 2 million tonnes. So please, when we're having these conversations and you have an infinite number of people with great ideas, the first question you've got to ask is how many tonnes? How is it going to affect the circular economy in Australia? How's it going to drive us towards sustainability or climate change reduction or even the 80% targets? Curbside recycling, nice to have. It's not a big ticket item. MSW residual sorting, the whole AWT platform, that was doing about 1.5 million tonnes, basically killed off by the New South Wales EPA, little bit still going on in Queensland, little bit in WA, but not much, and one proposal coming through for about 150,000 tonnes. So don't look to red bin processing as being much of a gain. MSW and C&I energy from waste. People always talk about energy from waste. I'll talk to this in a minute, but essentially it's only maximum 2 million tonnes, and I've given it 3 just to be generous to it. And I'll show you why in a minute by 2030, in the next 10 years. It's reasonably small. And by the way, even if we built all this energy from waste, it would only contribute 2% to Australia's electricity demand. So it's kind of small, but important. Very, very important as one of those step functions to get us there. And you can see it's one of the most important actions on this list, but still only 3 million tonnes. C&I source separation, C&I dirty MRFs, C&D source separation and C&D sorting are all the same thing. They're all driven by price. They're all driven by business owners, investors making a commercial decision about a return on investment, whether that's avoiding a landfill cost, if you're a facility like this deciding to recycle, or you're an investor investing in a paper processing plant or a construction and demolition sorting facility. They're all based on price, and that price is driven by landfill taxes. That price is driven by the opportunity cost of not landfilling that stuff. That is what has driven the massive growth in resource recovery in the last 20 years, has been the rise of landfill levies. So if we're going to do one thing, we need to seriously think about increasing the landfill taxes in all states to drive us to the 80%. No one will invest in C&I, C&D sorting unless they can make a return on investment. There's not a company out there that will do it, and the landfill levy is the one signal that governments can do that drive that. They could regulate and ban all this material from landfill, but they've never shown an appetite for regulatory bans on material to landfill at scale. So I say to people in the room, two messages: take away FOGO, take away landfill tax increases if you want to get to 80%. All right, a couple of quick comments. Why FOGO? Because it represents, according to the latest figures, 47% of mixed commercial waste going to landfill is organics, and upwards of 70% of household waste going to landfill in the National Waste Policy. I don't actually agree with the 73%. I think that's way overcooked, but most audits have said 50 to 60%. So mandate it, but it's not mandated across the country. It's mandated in New South Wales, Metro Melbourne, all of Victoria, Metro Adelaide, Metro Perth. Energy from waste, including process engineered fuel, only 3 million tonnes. Why? Because we killed off a bunch of energy from waste facilities in New South Wales with the change of policy. Ramondis pulled out because it got some heat in Queensland from the government. The government said you can't do it there, so the government killed it. Victoria has got a 1 million tonne cap, but those facilities got in under the cap and they're proceeding, so that's good. That's probably 1 million tonnes. And there are 2 plants being built in Perth, so probably another 1 million tonnes. So conservatively, 2 million tonnes, I've given it 3. So I'm hoping there'll be some more projects coming through in the next 5 years. Remembering it takes 5 to 8 years to get an energy from waste facility approved. So we're running out of time in that sense. C&I, C&D, the one I've mentioned, 6.5 million tonnes, a huge growth potential for Australia to improve its recycling rates. How do we do it? We've got to change the economics to get those more marginal tonnes out that are currently going to landfill. They're going to landfill because it's economically rational to send them to landfill. We have to change that rational argument by making it economically rational to recycle them. And that's the work done by the landfill levy. It represents 70% of the growth in recycling in Australia in the last 20 years is driven by the increase in price in landfills. Right? If you do the maths, I won't bore you with the detail. If anyone wants to know the maths, come and see me. And that's the story of landfill levies in Australia. You can see it's been a bit of a mixed bag. They are generally going up. Queensland, thankfully, has joined the main game, but they're not high enough to achieve 80%. And most of them are just increasing by CPI, with the exception of a couple of states, and they need to go higher. So local government, I hope you get out there and say, we've got a choice. We either have cheap, underpriced landfills that become little local contamination sites, or we start pricing landfills properly and we drive towards a circular economy. You can't have both. That's a hard conversation, but it's as blunt as that. Most recycling is subsidised by someone, so unless we get the prices right, no one's going to go up that cost curve looking to get the increasingly more expensive recyclables out of landfill. We've done all the easy stuff. We're now getting more and more expensive as we go up that curve. And what's still going to landfill is in the middle there. It's obvious. It's mixed C&D, it's mixed C&I and organics. If we do the first three and do them well, then we're a long way forward from where we are now, and there are two mechanisms that do that: mandate FOGO and get the landfill levy prices going up. This is what we see in the market today, just a mixed bag of pricing that does nothing in terms of setting clear policy signals to investors who need to invest, I would say, somewhere between $2 and $6 billion in the next 8 years, depending on how you do the maths, to achieve 80%. And we just don't have the framework to achieve it. And there was an interesting debate in the last session about strategic policy making. There is very little in Australia. Some people say, what about extended producer responsibility? What about we recycle coffee pods and sand shoes? Tops another 1 million tonnes. Absolute on the outside. 0.4, depending on what assumptions you make about soft plastic. Barry was here this morning talking about wanting 400,000 tonnes in soft plastic. If they can do that in the next 9 years, fantastic. I've given it 0.4. Be generous, give it 1 million tonnes. It's relatively small beer. Export bans have no effect, as I said earlier, but if we build the kit, they might change some local economics and pull out some more materials because there's infrastructure, processing capacity locally. That might have an economic effect, so I've given it 0.8 million tonnes. So the policies that matter: FOGO, commercial food mandate, levies and grants, and energy from waste. They are the four big ones, right? Look on there, you'll see it's just a mixed bag across the states of Australia. You would not rely on the state policy settings to get to 80%. We won't. We simply will not get there. Last slide, in the interest of time, is the 80% target achievable, aspirational, or wishful thinking? Well, it's aspirational and it's wishful thinking. There is no requirement for the states to report their achievement towards 80%, or councils for that matter. No states report to the federal minister about how they're going to achieve the 80%. What are the mechanisms? What are the infrastructure? What are the processes? What are the target streams? There is no reporting obligation to the federal minister. I've certainly raised it with Trevor Evans and said, if you do one thing in the meeting of environment ministers, require reporting so we all know how we're travelling. They need to model this stuff. They need to specifically address the dot points that I've mentioned up there. And as I've said here, there's a mixed bag of policy settings, and it would be very difficult for any investor, and I deal with hundreds of investors looking to invest in Australian waste recycling processing. But if we don't get the economic signals right and the policy settings right, we're just not going to go there. We're not going to achieve the 80%, and investment will slow as people just get frustrated in the Australian economy, and we're already seeing bits of that with the chopping and changing of policy settings at state levels. Thank you very much, Jen, wherever you are. I'm happy to take questions at the end.